Now I'm starting to see stuff. Okay. Give me a couple more seconds. Okay, yep, it's live. Alright, so I'm just gonna share this on Twitter. And then we're gonna talk about it. So, alright, so the more I've been playing Elden Ring and listening to the lore behind it, where people actually go through all the different stuff, they kind of list information about the actual game and whatnot. Let's see if I can get this to work real fast. There's a few different things I'm noticing quite a bit. Is everyone is noticing how basically like Mikola is changing things, right? But how is Mikola changing things? And originally when I heard the name Mikola, I was like, isn't that a male name? Isn't that a men's name? But it's not. They say it's a feminine name. Um, uh, uh, Mequilin is, I guess, another way you're more used to hearing the actual term. But the whole reason why I was like, Mikola even has like a metal sounding. Like if you speak English, then there's a chance that there's a lot of people that are gonna hear the word metal and or think metal when they hear it. Um, but here is the strange thing is Mikola spelt the exact way it is in many cases is spelt for a boy, while Melania, Melina, would be spelt for a girl. The reason why this is important is because Mikola is exiting the original order, the original way, and if Mikola was a boy originally and turning himself into a girl, so transitioning basically, it would be removing the what to everybody else is natural, what Mikola refers to as alien things. Because if we look at the way everything is before, basically the women are treated pretty much like, hey, you make a baby and that's about it, you know. We even go as far as like seeing like uh, the mother of the demigods, like she's chained up inside. She's like pretty much just chained up inside the Erd tree, and all she does is produce kin or produce children. You know, they produce the children for the siblings and everything, and just that's all it does. And then the husband, which is also the body of itself, is the performer. So what we see here is like before, it was always two separate entities, and the women were always pretty much considered they were just like a nobody. And then when the one that we had that caused the shattering or whatever, the reason why it was so huge was instead of being a male entity and a female entity, it was the female gods like joined physical form with the male, so they shared a body, and that makes a huge difference because like before that wasn't allowed, and it was kind of almost taboo, I guess you could say. And if you think about naturalism, uh, like when we say naturalism, we mean like stuff we can see in nature versus stuff we don't see in nature for both plants and animals combined. Um, we do see this like commonality where most plants and animals have a separated male and female form, and then every so often, because of situations like people always refer back to the frogs whenever they talk about transitioning and stuff like that in real days, and it's because well there are certain frogs that the men can turn to women when the time is need for it. Basically, when there's no women in the population and the population is about to die, pretty much going to die off, um, some men will have the ability, some of the male frogs, and keep in mind it's not all the male frogs, some of the male frogs will have the ability to basically transition to a female frog. If they ever try to transition back, they will become sterile and never be able to go back to female again. But also at the same time, the if the number of frogs that can go male to female is like 10%, the number that can go back to male after being a female would be like less than 1% of that 10%. So I mean, like the not even all of them can do that. So that's still even more rare. So the point we're getting at here is if Mikola and Millennia were born around the same time, but we say Mikola was born first, but not, and then Millennia was born sometime later, which would be, I'm honestly thinking Millennia was born not long before the Black Blade incident, you know, right before the Shattering, um, and was kind of lesser known, wasn't really well known of, um, but Mikola, and I think at the time that Mikola was doing everything it was doing, okay, Mikola's seeing the taboo working really, really well, creating the golden era where two entities became one, and he basically sees this point where women are basically the key to being a god or goddess, you know, being the super highest power. You got to be a female, basically. And then to be the controller of that power, you have to be a male. He is a male. So if he turns himself into a female, he removes one of the processes of this. The fact that A, there needs to be a controller, and the fact that B, the female is no longer important. So if the female is important, right? But in the eyes of the action, it becomes unimportant, where the male is all the importance. And that's kind of how always, like, even like in the actual world, that's kind of how it was for the longest time. Women did a bunch of things that really kept the world turning, but men were kind of more recognized for the world turning, if that makes any sense. I'm sure people in first world countries who have better understanding what that means than people in like a third world country or maybe even second world country. People in the second world country might actually see some of this evidence currently in their country, where most places wouldn't survive without the woman in the household keeping up with the household, and in a lot of places like in first world countries, keeping up with the work and the household and like multitasking, right? So we can even say that whole scene from 2 to 1 is also a combination of societal change, which we do see that in the lore, because they have the golden era when they have that societal change. But golden eras don't last forever, right? So as more and more of these babies are being made, we have more demigods than ever before at the same time. Well, that creates a problem. And when you have one child who's not known compared to all the other children who are known, well, that's going to create a problem, which is where we get the Black Blade incident from. So what I'm thinking is, before Milena was born, Mikola had the thought that a female was needed in the family. It was a lot of males, right? There was a lot of males in the family. So a female was needed to offset the balance and to gain actual power, like real power, not perceived power, but actual power. It came down to, I gotta be a... So transitioning from male to female would make sense in this case, right? You get rid of that natural order, you get rid of all the alien factors that they've always seen before, which you've already seen some of that happening already. He's already seen that happen kind of once before with his mom and dad. So it would make sense that he would want to progress even further into that ideology or thought processing. It makes sense, right? So then, but then Melina is born, and he's, like when Melina's born, he's probably already in the process of becoming female. Like I think honestly we're gonna see like the DLC is gonna be before he dies, and I think it's gonna be a lot of the information that leads up to the Black Blade. That kind of informs us on things that a lot of people have been questioning about, like, why did the Black Blade happen? Well, you got one kid who's like, hey, no one knows I even exist, and while you're the only other kid, the only one other kid in your family who's near your age is transitioning, and kind of sort of being looked at like an omen almost because of it. Like, so a lot of this stuff I've been hearing from like the archaeologists, the Toronto archaeologists, and a bunch of other people. Like, they're reading the stuff off the items, and I do get a sense that at some point in time, Mikola went from just a kid to another one we don't really want. Because they had a lot of they have Oldman kids. They have, it just seems so weird. So I honestly think that's what that is. An unalloyed in this case would be without secondaries. So something that I've kind of been hinting at. The whole point is that traditionally, the world relied on two factors of everything. It relied on a primary and a secondary. Your primary is your secondary, and your secondary is your primary. So a lot of times with like math and stuff, you don't mix the two. But when it comes into encryptions, you might want to mix the two. And a lot of times, what you'll do with things is, when you're doing processes, you'll say, okay, we're only using primaries at these points, and then we're only using non-primaries at these points. So when I say that, I mean using prime numbers to do math, and then using non-prime numbers to do math. So at certain points, you only use prime numbers to ensure that the output is always going to be the same based on the input. And other points, you just kind of don't do prime numbers to ensure you have more randomization within inside your math. For areas it doesn't matter. And so that's just basically what I'm saying is he's basically doing the same. We've seen the exact same thing as we see traditionally the female is the prime factor, but during most of the point of everything, it's the secondary. It's not the prime. The male is. And even though the male is not the prime, for the most of everything, it is. Until the point in time that it involves really basically wombing and birthing a child, like, well, it's all men in between those times. Something I haven't really said, but it's like, okay, so earlier I was saying Mikola was like, hey, I am we're in need of a female. That was the whole point, right? To create this unity of self. Not unity of two entities into self, marriage. Which, yeah, in case you didn't notice, look, that is what, what's her name, being fused with her husband's body also represents, like, permanent marriage. And yes, a Black Blade incident could also represent divorce. And could actually be a part of divorce, whereas, like, maybe the goddess was finally tired of the body host and was like, I want to get rid of that guy, and had a child who was unappreciated and kind of unknown, and was like, hey, I think there's things you can do. But because the child was already born and already has knowledge of things and is already kind of, you get them to do most evil deed. Then you get your only other female child who's kind of gone nuts because you're Well, it's not really a child, but the only other female around who can do anything, who's gone nuts because your current husband was their past husband who they're still in mad love with, and you're also part of their body. Yeah, I think that would be a way to be able to convince that person to rebirth your youngest child into a split formation of two entities, which we see quite often going into the wizardry and spiritury, the magic side of this game. So that would make sense where it's like, I need this one child split to two. I need their spiritual side and I need their physical side to be separated, and they both need to have magical ability. Okay, so those magical abilities are going to slightly differ, da da da. Both are going to look almost basically the same. One might be a mirrored object of the other, but of course the spiritual form is placed into a doll. The doll just happens to be a doll that looked like the original Melina. And so you end up with a, well, it's kind of, they even have it in the game. Sometimes when kings and queens had kids, dolls were made to represent that kid in their likeness. And it was just like a way that townspeople and stuff in other cities and other places would kind of know, you know, you could send that around and people could kind of get an idea of what your kid looked like. Well, it would make sense that you rebirth the non-physical side of your kid into their own doll. Right? That makes sense, don't it? And this is Melina. And this is because Melina did the Black Blade and all that. So that way, Mikola has an opportunity. See, a lot of people think, like, I'm noticing a lot of people are going around and doing all these different things, and it's like, they're constantly referencing how the current, like, during the Golden Era, that queen, I forget her, like, I'm bad with the name, so please bear with me. She was just not happy. She was noticing very quickly it's not what she thought it was going to be. Especially, I guess, when she got tied up, locked by the golden rune, or the great rune arc, into the Erd tree. I think that's pretty much a point in time when you know, okay, this is not going the way I thought it was going to go. And in the past, we've always seen queens that stuck in those poor situations figure a way out. So, in the time before divorce, the way you did it was you killed the person. There was a king that made it really famous. He was the first one to like behead his wife in order to have a divorce, and then later on, eventually created the divorce system, so he could stop killing queens. But so I honestly think that the queen had her husband killed by her own daughter because her youngest son was turning into a daughter in order to create a system that would both allow the female to be free of this trap and prison that they are constantly being presented in, while this allowing some men to be able to take upon this burden, while it creates so much for so many. It's not just, hey bro, this does this, like, bro, this does. Okay, it's like this gives women rights, while allowing men to both do the work of the women and the men, and allowing women to do the work of the women and men. Allows both to act as a single entity. I don't, because before, remember, men did things, women did things that were separated. And then Golden Era, we saw those two combine to create a perfect unity to do things, which ended up being imperfect mentally, causing divorce to allow the different version of what you were. You guys were considered a unity. The other unity, where instead of two entities becoming one, it's one entity becoming one to be able to do both entity things. And from that point on, both men and women would be allowed to do both men and women things. Both, so it doesn't matter. From that point on, it wouldn't matter on that case. And so both men and women could have kids or be the fighters or whatever. At that point, don't matter. Which is considered a higher societal processing. But this also means that, like, she would be able to get out of her prison and be able to live whatever life she chose. Only problem is, things didn't go exactly as planned. And so then it comes down to the battle of, right, Ionia, whatever, the Ionia battle. And so I'm noticing a lot of people saying, why did Milena sacrifice herself and all these different things. Let's see if I can get this to pop up. So, if Mikola is sacrificing everything to have an unalloyed life system over the lands between, then Milena sacrificing everything is similar. Those who doubted Milena or Mikola may later oppose Radon, for Milka can help those people with the rot that would be sued on them and that Radon is also suffering from and cannot fix. I think in Milena's head, at the point in time where she was at that point where it's like, I'm about to die, either I let him kill me and we're done, or I kill me and we're not done. So there's 2 points here that we go on, and we say, I think in her head she was doing the exact same thing that was being done for her. Like Mikola was sacrificing everything, so she was doing what Mikola was doing, but she was gifting her burden to more people to ensure they would seek Mikola's alternative for life thereafter, basically for help to then go with Mikola's life thereafter, which is the unalloyed life system, where, and well, you could actually say ungenderized life system. Let's just, so that way some people can understand what I mean. If Milena knew Mikola was dead or in forever slumber, and not transitioning into the ungenderized version of themselves, then I this is where we get to the 2 points. I think that she either would not have sacrificed herself, because then she'd be like, well, then who is actually going to be there to help the people I'm about to give this rot to? Or she did it knowing that she was about to gift a shorter, painful life to the next life cycle peoples, instead of long, painful life under the golden era, or with the golden era under Radon. So that's my honest opinion. So far, all of this is my honest opinion. There's little bits of proof here and there for basically everything I'm saying. Especially since in a lot of places that actually use the word Mikola spelt the way it's spelt in this game, since like, I don't know how far back it said, I think it said 1900 or 1900 something, Mikola has been used for boy, Milena has been used for girl. And I hate to be honest, like, that might be like a combination of like language like when languages are translated, sometimes they don't get translated correctly. So there could be even a point where there is some translation error in some of that, where because even the whole point of Mikola for boy, Milena for girl, was not said in actually English. So I always do wonder how much translation does make a difference, and thanks to like Tarnished Archaeologists and a few other great YouTubers and other peoples on the internet that deal with the lore side of this game, and I can honestly say that it does seem like some of the changes for translation was made to suit ideologies of the country or the language. For example, if they, because like the word Mikola and Millennia is the exact same, but if they're saying that they used the term for boy or for girl instead of maybe for old or for new, because Melania is considered the new way to spell Mikola, which Molecular is the new way of spelling an older name, which was a female name traditionally. Um, Michaelian, or a feminine name, but it's something different. Um, so it's just like lots of things there possible. But yeah, I honestly think that when it comes down to it, there's a really big chance that Mikola was a guy transitioning to a girl in order to do all this stuff. Now, something I did see, especially in the thing we were just looking at, someone said that Melina needed to defeat Radon in order to get the moon eclipse. Okay, so the meteor was supposed to hit like right after the moon eclipse, and that's kind of important um, because if it was supposed to hit right after, right, then that means the change to the the one bodied the unalloyed faith, or the unalloyed system, or the ungenderized system, and then that meteor would immediately kill Silica, and a lot of the magic and stuff that was actually even used to create the Black Blade and all that stuff. So a lot of that stuff would be lost. All right. But at the same time, if that type of stuff was lost, this eclipse did happen, then the Hulk tree would actually be able to finish off its growth. It would have actually been able to do what it was supposed to do, finalize into an Earth tree, and then gave birth, its first birth, to its queen bearer. I'm gonna say it like that. Where I would just go to bearer, or that's child, spawn. Yeah, spawn bearer. Because at that point you can't call it a gender, so it would give birth to a spawn bearer. That spawn bearer would be the controller responds for that Earth tree, and would then handle how processes are created for that Earth tree era, which probably would be way different compared to the ones before, where it required two for everything. Like the original Earth trees, they had women that would collect the blessings, and they would have the men that basically protected the blessings. The women would perform all the rituals for the men, or to the men. You know, so I'm sure that kind of stuff would be different, where people would go collect blessings upon themselves for themselves, or upon themselves for others. You know, like, things would be much different. And I think it'd be a much more decentralized system, so to speak, as in where if ungenderized means nothing, like male female doesn't matter to the fact of like many things, what bathroom I use, or what office I hold, or how much I get paid, then, you know, like, at the same time, that means that things you do would be more decentralized. It wouldn't be just women cleaning. Men might clean. It wouldn't be just men, you know, doing metal work and stuff. You know, things that we've actually seen, progressions that we've actually seen happen in real societies. But think about it like that. Like, if women could only collect blessings, well, now anyone can collect blessing. If anyone can collect blessing, then there could be an abundance of blessings until someone's ready to collect it. And if there's an abundance of blessings, then there's a more controllable life cycle system. And if there's a more controllable life cycle system, then we can ensure that we don't run into another situation where the only other female in the family is the ex-wife, who is absolutely nuts and refuses to do anything, and in order to bear the pain and agony of knowing what's his name did to her, leaving for the the new queen, or the new goddess, gave her a small piece of himself to allow her to rebirth him in her perfect view. You know, I mean, like, that's that egg. That's that sapling. That sapling, it's Erd Tree sap, but it's a piece of him inside of there. So she could rebirth him in her own view. But I think he didn't use just himself. I think he used part of the Albinoric stuff. Because the Albinoric blood clot is, you know, just like, hey, this is a fake, whatever, you know, this is artificial. Well, that would make sense, right? He can't actually put part of himself in there because he knows part of himself is about to be fused with what's her name, right? So if he puts part of himself in there, she'll know that he's not all there. So I think he did an artificial fusement of himself. So whatever part that he knew she'd be taking, basically got that part of him was put in there. So she wouldn't know something's missing because she'd be taking up the space that is missing. I know that sounds more physical, but I mean more mental. And maybe a little bit physical, an organ or two. For example, if someone put their heart in a container, and you're saying, hey, for marriage, I give you a container that holds my physical heart, like my actual heart, right? You would notice that wasn't your heart, right? Okay, but what if I said all that, but beforehand I gave my, I don't know, part of my brain to somebody, or I gave a valve, like one valve of my heart to somebody, or, you know, like, see what I'm saying? Like there's other things that could be gifted without being noticed, and I do think that most of it was more mental than physical. So, like, for example, I would probably be like, here's a piece of my physical brain, for my brain, you know. You won't notice that's missing because you're going to be in my brain. You're going to be a part of it, so you won't know. Hold on. But yeah. So that's what I'm really thinking. And if you think about, like, how a lot of the storylines are set up for this game, it's... Come on, give me... Yeah, we go. Not only is it, like, traditional mythology and kind of sort of realistic ancient times and stuff, like, some of the stuff we see is, like, actually really did happen. You know, we actually did see situations where we see families fight a long time ago over little things like who is going to become the next king or queen or whatever. I mean, just look at Queen Elizabeth II, right? Like, her mom pretty much refused to give up the throne, right? She refused to marry, I think it was. Just because she knew she had more power by herself. Queen Elizabeth II knew she had more power by herself after her husband died. Well, I think it might have been her that actually knew it. I think it wasn't the first name, it was Queen Elizabeth II that knew it. I can't remember which one that figured it out. But that was a key point there. They figured out the husband gone. They actually had more power because they were then doing both work. They were doing what the men had to do and what the women had to do. And in that case, that sometimes made it easier for them because sometimes men and women don't want to do the same thing. You know? And I would want to refer a lot of what we see in Elden Ring, specifically, like this one from Software, more referencing the King James timeline, right? And I might be wrong on which King James it is, but Queen Elizabeth I's granddad, I would say, is either the dragon from here, I forget his name, the first Elden Lord that was before human, or the first Elden Lord of human. God, you know, I think that was, I forget, Godfrey or Radagon. Fuck. Okay, so we had the dragon, and then it's the lion. So yeah, the lion. That's what I'm referring to. So I think a lot of that, you can just look into that timeline and you kind of see how a lot of that refers to this and how this refers to a lot of that. And and if you think about it, they were talking about going into a timeline of modernization like we have now, where, you know, the mystic wasn't as important as the knowledgeable. You know, think about that. Mikola was using knowledge to save, to do, to create, instead of just mythological belief systems. And in some cases, like when I first wrote that comment, I originally put faith, unalloyed faith system. And it should say um, unalloyed, genderized faith system, because it's both. For them, it's both. They are not just removing the idealisms behind gender and what that means, but within the society, not the individual people, me or you, but the society. Something that we kind of saw in America in the 90s. We did see that. We saw that in America in the 90s. We saw that in Europe in the 2000s, in the late 90s, where we saw in society it no longer mattered if your nurse was a guy or girl. It no longer mattered if your doctor was a guy or girl. It no longer mattered if the person that rang your order was a guy or girl and the person who cooked your food was a guy or girl. But just 40 years before that, when like food service became like kind of popular in America, for example, it started kind of like booming, with like real small shops and stuff. Like it was always women did all the ordering and men did all the cooking. While then at the house, it was kind of the opposite. Men did all the stuff with the people and women did all the cooking. And with this unalloyed, ungenderized faith system, or uh, unalloyed faith genderized system, then you don't have to have faith. You can use knowledge instead, and you don't have to have gender defining roles within society. Gender would just define gender, and that's it. And even that would be choosable upon oneself. Which, think about it, if you have that option, have you should have it. Like we all should have that option, I guess, but shouldn't be pushing it on everybody else, which is why Redon needed to be stopped. He was wanting to push a system on everybody else instead of just having an option for someone to choose. And that's the huge difference. Nicola wanted to just give an option instead of forcing